Dr. Anthony Harper here in Jerusalem. A blessed time to be here, and I'm joining Josh Reinstein. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on the show.
So I know you're involved with a coordinated effort between Christians and people in the Israel government. So explain for our viewers about all that you do in working with the Knesset members and with people in the U.S.
So we started the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus in 2004, and the idea was to build a direct line of communication and coordination and cooperation with Christian leaders around the world. It came during the time of the Second Intifada, ironically, because we saw that people who have a political interest aren't necessarily going to stand with Israel. We have one vote in the United Nations compared to 22 Arab votes, many more Muslim votes, and people who have an economic interest aren't necessarily going to stand with Israel. We have not the oil wealth of our neighbors. It was only people who put values and beliefs ahead of economic concerns and political concerns that will stand with Israel, and that leaves what we call the people of the book, both Jews and Christians. So we started this caucus in 2004. Today it's the largest and most influential caucus in our Knesset. But what happened in 2006 was the Congress, under the leadership of Elliot Engel and Dave Weldon, a Republican Jew, a Republican Christian, and a Democrat Jew, they started a sister caucus during the time of the Second Lebanese War to show solidarity with Israel, called the Congressional Israel Allies Caucus. And today we have 39 Israel Allies caucuses in countries around the world, over 1,000 members of elected officials, members of parliament in our network, and we call the whole movement faith-based diplomacy.
Okay, and you know a few Knesset members that I know, actually, and that being Knesset member Yehuda Glick. But from what I understand, he will not be in the Knesset, the new Knesset coming up.
Yes, of course. He was an incredible asset. He was a member of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus, which I direct. He worked with Christians all over to try to get the real truth out about Israel. Unfortunately, he was not reelected in the last Knesset election.
And neither was Dr. Elisa Levy.
Yes, also incredibly talented. She's an Orthodox woman running with a secular party, was a member of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus, and was not reelected in the last election as well.
That's disappointing. Now, one that I'm really close with is Sharon Haskell. I met her, and I think I mentioned before about meeting with Yehuda Glick and her with President Trump's inauguration. And Sharon Haskell has been very outspoken and very connected to the Christian community in the U.S., and she is close to the Prime Minister. She's in the same Likud party.
Yes, Sharon Haskell is an incredible member of Parliament. She's been very involved with the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus. And one of the things that she focused on, which was interesting, was going around and talking about the issue of BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanction Movement, and how other parliamentarians around the world can take real acts and try to stop this, because it's just the modern version of anti-Semitism.
Yes, I've taken a tour of the BDS issue here in Israel, some factories, and with the government press office, and they were educating the news reporters about what's really going on, and that's a serious problem throughout the world, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of misinformation about what's going on. The BDS movement is not hurting the Israelis, it's hurting the Palestinians who work in the factories, as you've got to see firsthand.
I did, yeah.
But even more than that, BDS is just a modern version of the 1930 Nuremberg laws. Instead of saying the word Jew, they say Israel. They say don't buy from Israel. Well, in the 30s, they said don't buy from Jews. They say don't let Israeli professors in your university. In the 1930s, they said don't let Jewish professors in your university. It's the same blood libel. It's the same idea that we're taking over someone else's country, even though we have incredible rights, obviously, to this land as the Jewish people that you can see in the Bible. And it's the newest form of anti-Semitism that we're seeing spread around the world.
Now, I've heard about Bible studies happening in the Knesset. Christians and Jews meeting together in the Knesset. What do you know about that?
So I'm not very much involved in that. We run faith-based diplomacy, so we take on real political issues. But yes, look, we're in Jerusalem, and if you whip out your Bible, it's one of the only places in the Middle East where you can not just study the Bible, but you can have a prayer study openly, and we have complete freedom of religion. So it's natural that Jews and Christians and Arabs would, read the Bible or the Quran in the Knesset. It's not it wouldn't be a weird thing to do. It's not something that we're involved in, but I'm sure it happens.
Yeah, I was curious about President Trump's peace plan. A lot of people are waiting for that to be released. It was said in the news, many news stories about it being released after the Prime Minister election. And has there been any concern, any ideas about a peace plan, what that might entail? Or?
I think the problem is that no one knows what's in it. But on the other side, President Trump has been the greatest friend we've ever had of Israeli Jews he has an 86% approval rating here in Israel, and I don't think 86% of Israeli Jews agree on anything else in Israel. He's a real hero. He's done probably 8 of the biggest things America could do for Israel in the last 12 months alone. And so I don't think that people are scared of the peace plan. They're just cautious to see what it really is. If it means giving up land, I think it would be a big mistake, because a lot of people here understand that we've given all we can give, and we don't want to go into this two-state solution mess. But from what I hear from the reports, it isn't a two-state solution plan. It's more of a doctrine. So we're waiting to see it, just like everyone else, I think.
It would be great if that plan was released while I'm in Jerusalem.
Absolutely. You would have a chance to hear real reactions to it. In the meantime, it's all speculation.
It is. And so we want to encourage people, of course, to pray for Israel. And I know a lot of Christians support Israel. One of the largest groups I'm aware of in the U.S. is Christians United for Israel.
Yes.
And they've been so supportive and spoken out, actually, about BDS. Made a complaint about the BDS and exposed that. And the UNRWA issue. How much do you know about that UNRWA issue?
I know a lot about it. We've been dealing with it for decades now. It's absolutely obscene what's going on. Basically, they had the UNHCR, which is a body in the UN that deals with all refugees around the world. And then they created a fictitious body called UNRWA that only deals with the Palestinian refugee. Not only that, but that UNRWA gets more funding by multiples from the UNHCR. And instead of repatriating refugees like UNHCR's mandate says, it keeps us going forever. So you have 5th, 6th generation refugees. And one of the most incredible things that Donald Trump and his administration did is he defunded UNRWA. And I think that other nations need to follow that example, because UNRWA is always going to be an open wound when it comes to Jews and Palestinians, because the real number of refugees from the time of 1948 is maybe 30,000, but when you look at UNRWA's numbers, we're talking millions and millions of people for generations.
Yeah, from what I understand, it's the main foundation is hate.
Absolutely. It's to keep this problem alive. They're not looking for solutions. They're trying to keep this as an open wound for both sides. And the real victims, once again, I think, are the Palestinian people. They don't have the rights because they're reflected as refugees that anyone else had. Look, there were more Jewish refugees than Arab refugees after 1948, but they didn't last long. The minute they got to Israel, we made them citizens and they became Israeli citizens. But there are still people sitting in refugee camps in Lebanon and Jordan with the status of refugee from 70 years ago. It's absolutely outrageous.
Yeah, the rise in anti-Semitism. We see that in the U.S. Congress with certain Congress members making statements that are very hateful. And one of those being a new congressperson from the Sudan, that wasn't the Sudan, it's Omar is her last name. And it's really been upsetting about the rise in anti-Semitism worldwide. And as you mentioned, BDS, an expression, UNRWA, and so many other things that are happening. But with enough Christians praying around the world in support of Israel, with God's help, with the God of Israel, be able to overcome that hatred.
I think one of the things that's frightening for a lot of people is this unholy alliance between radical Islam and extreme liberal atheists, or the progressive movement. And they disagree on every other issue except for one that they've come together on. That's their hatred of Israel and the God of Israel. And we're seeing that on university campuses, we're seeing that in the media, we're seeing that with this new congresswoman. And people have to just call it out for what it is. It's hate and it's anti-Semitism. Now, I don't think the Democratic Party reflects that. Personally, there are some really strong members of Congress on the Israel issue in the Democratic Party. But unfortunately, these people have been able to take over the narrative, and they speak for the Democratic Party, like Congresswoman Omar, or AOC, they call her, several extreme leftists that have really aligned with radical Islam on the issue of Israel.
Well, you made a good point. There are people there are members of Congress, the Democrat Party, that are very supportive of Israel. And I know of one, Eliot Engel.
Yeah, just in the Congressional Israel Allies Caucus, we have 2 chairmen from the Democratic Party. One is Brad Sherman, the other is Eliot Engel. But there's also Nita Lowey. I mean, there are many. We've always had support from both sides of the aisle, because the Jewish community, who mostly supports Israel, obviously, support the Democrats, and the Christian community, who stand with Israel, support only candidates that stand with Israel as well. So, and they're Republicans. And so we always had in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party bipartisan support. But unfortunately, that narrative in the Democratic Party right now is being hijacked by the progressive movement, which is inherently anti-Semitic.
Yes, Dinesh D'Souza, who was recently pardoned by President Trump, has had some movies that have been controversial. Hillary's America, Death of a Nation recently. I don't know if you've seen those, but he talks about the progressive movement. The real foundation of the problem is hate. And a new word for socialism or communism in certain cases.
Look, I think the majority of people who consider themselves progressive aren't involved in hate or discrimination, but the leadership certainly is. And if you look at where they're heading, it's not just identity politics, but it's pointing fingers at people and saying that these are the reasons I have problems. And the number one on the list is Jews. And so you see it's inherently anti-Semitic by what they're saying. They're calling Jewish people white supremacists. I mean, how crazy is that? The biggest victim of white supremacists in America are the Jewish community. So how could a Jewish person be a white supremacist? It doesn't make sense. But in their eye, the super person who's been oppressing them is the Jew. And that's just, again, the same canards of classic anti-Semitism that we're seeing over and over again.
How can people learn more about what you're doing here? You have a website.
We have a website. You can go to cac.org.il. You can go to israelallies.org to find out about the Israel Allies Foundation. We have a Facebook for the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus where you can follow daily our activities. And I encourage everyone to get involved and to make a strong stand for Israel, because Israel is the tip of the sword, and we're fighting for Judeo-Christian values over here.
So, we have news that is based on the truth, and we need to get the truth out about what's really going on with Israel, and to talk about the hate that has been happening through the BDS and so many other ways. And hopefully we'll have more peace very soon. Of course, as Christians, we believe only that the Messiah can bring peace. I know Jews believe that as well.
Yes, the big difference is we believe the Messiah is coming for the first time, and you believe he's coming for the second time.
Right.
But we both believe the Messiah is coming soon, and we're excited about that. And we see the peace of Jerusalem. Look, one of you talk about fake news, and you talk about the mainstream media. One of the biggest lies about Israel, the biggest slanders, is that Jerusalem is a dangerous place. And Jerusalem, statistically, and this is what's absurd about it, is the safest capital in the world. In 2014, there were something like 850 murders in Chicago. In Jerusalem, including terrorist attacks, and this was a bad year for us, we had 6. All right, so you can't even compare it to other capitals. Yet if you talk about Jerusalem, people think there's shooting in the streets. And of course, it's one of the most peaceful, safest places in the world, and that's because we believe that God keeps the peace of Jerusalem. God asks us to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and we see that prayers work.
Well, does that apply to East Jerusalem as well?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, there's when you say East or West Jerusalem to a person living in Jerusalem itself, there's no different. There's actually more Jews living in East Jerusalem than Arabs. There's 250,000 Jews in East Jerusalem, and I think 230,000 Arabs. There's no line or border or anything like that. It's just all one big city. But yeah, statistically, it's one of the safest places. For capitals, at least, it's the safest capital in the planet.
Yeah. So, like you mentioned, it's just all one city, Jerusalem.
Absolutely.
And I don't know why. You know why that people are referring to this as East Jerusalem?
I do know why. I do know why. What happened is that what people try to do is they try to confuse the issue. And what they're saying is that we should divide the Jerusalem and give East Jerusalem away to the Muslims and West Jerusalem to the Jews. Why do they say that? Because they know that East Jerusalem is really what we consider Jerusalem. So they're saying give away Jerusalem. In the early 1900s, as the population of Jerusalem grew, the suburbs to the west started new neighborhoods. And that's West Jerusalem. Now, of course, it's all one big Jerusalem. But you have to understand that when they say, we need to divide Jerusalem and give away East Jerusalem, they're saying give away Jerusalem. That's where all our holy sites are. The Western Wall, the Old City, Garden Tomb for Christians, the Temple Mount is all in what they call East Jerusalem. And if you know your Bible, God didn't say to King David, build to the east side of the city.
Of course.
He said, settle Jerusalem. So that's Jerusalem. And now they're saying, okay, you take the suburbs and we'll take Jerusalem. And that's what they're trying to do through the two-state solution and some of the peace plans that we've seen in the past. I know for sure that's not Donald Trump's peace plan, because we saw that Donald Trump took the bold step of recognizing Jerusalem, moving the embassy to Jerusalem just last year. So we're on the right path.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing with me.
It's always been a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah. People can find more information about you on the website. So once again, just look up, his name is Josh Reinstein, and a lot of great websites he did mention earlier, and pray for Israel, for the peace of Jerusalem.